welcome everyone. I'm really excited for the episode that we have and the guest that I have today. I've got Blake Lawler with me. Blake, it's good to have you.
Thanks for having me on, Derek. I appreciate your time.
So, as a little bit of background, Blake and I met on our missions. We served in Oklahoma, Tulsa, and Blake was my first zone leader, one of my first zone leaders, and I still remember spending the day. I think it was maybe my first transfer day with you in Branson, Missouri, and
Yeah,
what that was like being on the strip and talking to people. And I just thought, dude, this is a guy I want to be like. And so I was just really, really impressed. So it's fun. You and I have not really connected a whole lot, even really since our missions. So even a lot of today's episode will be, a lot of learning from my end on your experience and what it's been like to go through things. And I really appreciate you just kind of being willing to share your journey and where you're at. So I will let you kind of just start off, talking about anything that you think is relevant, childhood growing up in the church, and kind of get to wherever we're going to go with this and ask some questions along the way.
sure. Well, I grew up in Utah as well. I'm from Centerville, Utah. I come from a big family. I'm the youngest of 10 kids, and I know that's kind of stereotypical for Catholics and Mormons to have a lot of kids. And but even in my group of friends and people I knew, 10 kids was a lot. I don't know how my parents did it, but it was a lot, and it was a very typical, well, I don't know, fairly typical LDS upbringing. We read from the scriptures every morning, even in the summer, 6 a.m. It was always going to happen. I think now, even because of that, I can't sleep in at all. I'm just a morning person and just waiting to be called up for scriptures in the morning. Um, I'm on a call, buddy. Sorry. My now, oh, buddy, close the door for me if you would. My 9-year-old just walked in. Sorry. Anyway, you know, so I was always a pleaser. I just did what I was told, and never wanted to disappoint my family or my parents. I had some older siblings that I remember getting, disciplined and whatnot, and I just, didn't ever want to disappoint my parents. Didn't ever want to make them sad or anything like that. It was, kind of boring. Nothing really all that exciting. I did actually, I do remember now that I'm talking about it. There was a period growing up that my father actually was inactive for just a short period. I was pretty young, so I don't really remember it. My dad loves to watch golf, and I just remember a couple times being sick on Sunday. I got to stay home and watch golf with dad, which I thought was pretty cool. Um, but then when I was probably, I think I was 9, I had a brother who passed away, and in a car accident, and that was a time that I don't know. I was pretty young then, so I don't know if it. You're kind of oblivious when you're young, but from my recollection now, that's kind of what made my dad say, "Hey, maybe I need to view things different, or maybe I need to be more part of the family, or take my church and religious responsibilities more seriously." Um, since that time, my parents have been on multiple missions, and they're very strong in the church. They are temple workers. In fact, we live far away from them. We live in Kansas right now, and anytime they come to visit, they don't stay very long because it's usually we got to get back and we got to work at the temple, things like that. They're just that they kind of have a singular focus on a lot of those things. Um, Finished high school, did a year of college, and went on my mission. And I loved being a missionary. I I put my heart and soul into it. I've got the kind of personality that probably thrives on being in a structured environment and being told do X, Y, and Z, and you'll get those results. And that really worked for me. I was never a big scripture studier. I was semi-conscious in the mornings for scripture study, but other than that, once I got on my mission, I saw those that were more experienced and they were just really smart and really good at talking to people, and I wanted to be like them, and so I put a lot of my heart and soul into my mission, and it was a great experience. I really Today I don't think I would be the same person that I am without the experience of my mission and learning and growing, and you really grow up a lot on my mission. So I am appreciative of that.
Yeah,
So
it's interesting because I feel very similarly. I was I felt like a very hard worker. Wanted to get stuff done. I didn't want to just be there. I wanted to have an impact. Um, I at the same time, like it was a big struggle. I remember, I mean, basically every day waking up with this like feeling in my stomach that I was gonna have to go talk to people that I didn't know, and so for me, that's when I really began to question, and so there was a lot of internal dialogue and challenge. But at the same time, like you said, it's man, it taught me that I can do hard things, and it taught me that I can talk to people if I have to. And so it was a great experience that's made me relatively successful in a lot of other areas of life. So quick question with your mission. On your mission, was there ever cause for question, or were you always really pretty confident?
I actually on my mission I felt confident. I felt and it was this perspective that I had always had with anything church or gospel related. Was growing up, it was the church is true. Joseph Smith's a prophet. The Book of Mormon is true. If there are any problems or struggles or questions or shortcomings, anything like that, it was there's something wrong with me. There's not something wrong with the church. And I feel like my mission really solidified that in many ways. Um, there were things that I heard briefly or that were said briefly, and I just put it to the side. I didn't pay attention to it. I I really said I know what I know, and I'm not I don't need to consider anything else.
So I'm curious, as you look back on your journey and everything, were there ever times on your mission that you questioned the validity of the church? Is this the only true church?
At that point, no. I really thought that I just believed. I don't think I had any real big, powerful spiritual experience. And in fact, the only one that I could maybe say that maybe I had was I delayed my mission a year. I went to a year of school. And I remember to keep a scholarship, I had to go to a year of school before I went on my mission. And my mom really didn't want me to go, or she didn't want me to delay. She just wanted me to go, because things happen and people end up not going on missions. And so uh, I prayed really hard that time to make sure that it was okay that I wait a year. And I felt prompted, I guess you could say, that it was fine for me to wait a year. So, anytime that I had questions or struggles or, things that just didn't seem right, I guess my perspective was there's something wrong with me, not something wrong with the church. I didn't doubt the church. I just doubted, it was always I've got the shortcomings. I need to work harder. I'm obviously not praying or fasting. I don't have enough faith. I'm not as good and strong as I need to be. And that was my viewpoint. And so when that's the answer you're looking for. Church had never been a super important thing to me, but when you go out on the mission, church is life and reading, and the best missionaries are the missionaries that really study hard and they memorize scriptures. And uh I it wasn't easy for me. I You would think it would go away, the natural inclination to be like, I don't want to go talk to that person and interrupt them as they're sitting in their garage.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. Uh, and but I did, and I felt like my mission was great. There was something that at that point, my brother, just older than me, he left the church when I was on my mission, and I didn't get all the details. I didn't know all the specifics and whatnot. Um, yeah, and that brother, he's homosexual. He's gay, and I remember after he left, he would send emails to the family like every week, basically with what I equated at that point as like anti-Mormon material, and just, you know, I didn't even have any desire to read it. It was just like, obviously he's in a position where the church is not right for him, but I still believe that the church was right. I really just kind of put it to the side. It didn't really bother me. Obviously the situation bothered me, but it didn't bother me what he was saying, because I just didn't place any merit in it. Anybody who was upset, angry, like, people are going to lash out. That's how it's going to be. And that was my viewpoint. So, um I had a good mission. I met a lot of great people. That's when I decided I needed to choose a better profession, and so I went into dentistry, like like many others that you've talked to here. Um, and I went home. It was great, a great experience. I got home from my mission, and I was weird, and I would talk to people on the street, and when I met my wife, I'd say hi to people, and she would say, Did you know that? Do you know that person?" "No, I'm just being friendly." Um so I got home, and shortly after getting home, I met my now wife, who was she's a music major, same as me, and we started dating, and kind of the rest is history with that.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So, what year was that? How long have you been married now at this point?
We've been married for 15 years now. We got married in 2009.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay.
I had been home a year, um, and Lindsay. I remember when that's her name. Sorry, Lindsay. When we were dating, I remember telling her at some point that I'm willing to do whatever the Lord asks of me. And she had made some comment about how that was a very attractive attribute, or things like that. She's very similar to me. She's the sweetest person. Well, she's the sweetest person you'll ever meet. Obviously, just like me. No, but she nobody everybody likes her. She is the kindest, best person. Uh, the only shortcomings is her ability to see through my BS, maybe, and that she sticks around with me. She has a very strong testimony. She's just a very hard worker. She is a very believing member of the church, and still is. Um, so yeah.
So, yeah, let's talk. I think one of the reasons why I am really excited to have you and be able to have this interview is because I feel like so many people that I hear from, a big part of the challenge is in a marriage, in a family, when there's one person that goes through a faith crisis, for lack of a better words, and the other person is not ready or very resistant, and it's not easy. And so I'm would love to hear I mean, I guess before kind of talking about, what that was like in your marriage, is just how did things start unraveling for you? What was the what was the process that kind of led to um your processing and everything, because
Sure.
you were, you kind of said, it sounds like, really kind of saw the church and everything through, relatively black and white lens. So what was the process that led to that becoming a little bit more gray?
Sure. So, you know, with the gospel, with the church, the nice thing is kind of like on the mission is there's a checklist. There's kind of a, do this and you'll get this. And there's a path. I got home from my mission, I met the girl of my dreams, and we got married, and a few years later we started having kids, and it was kind of like there's this life plan. And that's the nice thing, is that it just, I knew that if I followed the this path, that I could be very successful and happy, and we were. When we were in dental school, and actually, my wife reminded me of this later because I didn't even really remember it. But at one point when we were in dental school, we were in Virginia, just outside of Richmond, and we got asked to be members of a downtown branch of the church. They basically would call young couples like us, to kind of bolster the smaller congregations and basically give some dependable people to have callings and whatnot. And we went down there, and I was called to be the executive secretary, and we had, I think, two children at that point, or we may have had our second child during that time. And man, it was a lot of work, and it was kind of hard and frustrating. And you know it really kind of started becoming a chore. And there was a point that I said to my wife, I dread going to church. I I know I'm supposed to feel rejuvenated and feel like it helps me get through the week, because I hear other people say that, and I just don't feel that at all. I think about these meetings I have to go to. I think about these people I have to pick up to take to church, and I it's overwhelming and it's not enriching. And I think she felt to a degree that same way. But she's really good at just doing what she's supposed to do, and kind of keeping her head down. So there was that. But even at that point, I didn't sit there and say, well, because I'm not feeling fulfilled, like the church can't be true. There really was none of that. I still, thought it was true. My Where things kind of started happening for me, after dental school, I practiced for a couple years in New Mexico. I was still feeling a little bit of that same not fulfillment from church, and I was the executive secretary. I was at a lot of meetings. I just felt like I had another part-time job and was doing financial stuff for the church, and it was just a lot of work. But when I moved to Wichita, well, actually, sorry, sidebar. During all this time, there was a point that, my sister, one of my sisters, left the church. And the viewpoint prior to that point had always been like, I think what we all think when people leave the church, or what the majority of people think. And that is, well, they, my brother, he's gay. Well, yeah, that's why he left the church. Again, nothing wrong with the church, just wrong with the individuals. Or I had a different sister that when she graduated high school, she moved to Hawaii with another sister. I don't think she's gone to church hardly since. And I don't think she ever had any semblance of a testimony. And for her, it's, well, she just doesn't want to do it. She's just lazy. It's not the church, it's her. But I had a sister. and I actually had to look it up, but she sent an email to the family in 2014, so it's been almost 10 years. And this sister, um, she had been called to teach gospel doctrine or Relief Society. I think she was teaching Relief Society. And she said in the email that she had started to kind of question some things and her testimony wasn't that strong. And when she was asked to teach Relief Society, she said, you know what, this is going to be good for me. This is going to strengthen my testimony. This is going to really just help me grow. And she said that it actually did the opposite. I'm not sure if I think it was a Doctrine and Covenants year, so more heavily geared towards church history. Um, but she didn't go into details at that point. She just said, I'm open to talking about it if anybody wants to talk about it. But my family and I were not going to be going to church anymore. We decided to leave the church. And that may have been the point. So that was while I was still in dental school, towards the end of dental school. That may have been the point where I just said, gosh, that's really interesting because that sister, she's not lazy. She wasn't leaving the church because she wanted to drink or because she didn't have 3 hours to spare on Sunday. She was leaving because of some actual concerns with church doctrine or church history or whatnot. But even at that point, I think there was like an email chain started, and everybody was saying, "Oh, let's have an open place where we can discuss church questions or thoughts, or just to have non-confrontational discussions."
And
And
this was just with your family, right?
this was just with my family. Yeah. Um, Honestly, I participated zero. I didn't give any feedback of what Facebook or what email or what I thought would be best. I was so busy, and I didn't want to participate. I just said, you know what, I'm just going to keep my head down and keep doing what I'm doing, and whatever you guys want to do is fine. Um, as a side note, of the 10 children that my parents have, um, about half of them are no longer active, and they're all for very different reasons. I would still consider myself. I don't know. I would still consider myself to be active, but frankly, I'm not believing. I don't believe in it. So that was kind of the first kind of made me really think and shifted my paradigm, I guess you could say, a little bit. But when I was living in Wichita, um, I honestly I have no idea what the conversation or what the moment was or what really happened. Uh, but I had heard of that document, the letter to my wife and kids. I think that's what it's called. Is that the C? I don't think that's the CES letter. Anyway,
Right.
so I heard of that, and I don't remember the exact details, but polygamy had just never sat that great with me. But my brother, when I told you he had been sending emails uh, when he left the church, he had said something about, oh, Joseph Smith getting caught with Fanny Alger, who was only 14. And I thought, oh, well, anybody could just say anything. Who knows that that's actually true? And so I was trying to find a little bit of like, well, what are the facts? What's actually true? And so I pulled up that letter, and it was a lot bigger document than I thought it would be. And there's a lot of topics, and it's amazing the things that you can justify or things that you can explain away or just ignore. And I didn't really look into too much of those. I said, I really have these slight concerns with polygamy, and even then I didn't know that I had a big concern with polygamy. And so I started reading on that. And when I read specifically that Joseph Smith had married women who were already married, I remember just having the biggest sinking feeling in my stomach. because that did not fit in the box of what I thought I knew about polygamy. Most things I thought, yes, there were lots of women whose husbands were being killed and they needed somebody to take care of them, and the Lord needed righteous families to grow the church and the gospel. I would say, okay, I don't love it, but that makes sense. But when I read that he had married women that already had husbands, some of those husbands were on missions and whatnot, and I put myself in the position of, if I was one of those husbands and my wife was coerced into marrying the prophet of the church, there just was no explanation for that for me that I think a man of God would do. Um, that was the first point that I just thought, oh my gosh, maybe the church isn't true. Maybe there are some things, some facts that I just ignored. And that was the beginning of my faith crisis, I guess you could say. That was the real beginning.
So, okay, so you had family members that you knew about that had shared things. You hadn't been very vocal or kind of talked through things, and you kind of go through this experience on your own. What what was it like in that moment and over the next like coming weeks? Who did you open up and share things to anyone? Did you kind of just hold it in? Did you feel alone? What was that like during that period? Because it can be very unsettling.
Yeah, it was very unsettling. I didn't really talk to anybody about it. Um, I didn't talk to my wife about it. In fact, I think I was actually sitting there reading it during general conference, um, because I think somebody had said something about polygamy, and I said, "Oh, what was that letter called? I want to look that up. I want to see and learn for myself." So I really didn't go to anybody, and I that was probably 4 or 5 years ago. Still, I put it on my shelf. I hear people talking about putting it on the shelf. Just put it aside. I still was going through the motions and whatnot. I don't know how much longer or how close to that time later I did open up to my wife a little bit and said, I'm really kind of struggling with my testimony. I worry that it's not true. And I kind of told her the polygamy thing with the polyandry is what it's called, with marrying women that are already married. And she didn't have much to say. She just kind of said, I polygamy I've never really liked. She just kind of was like, I don't understand it, but I know that I have a testimony. She's also said at other times that, the brethren, they know all of this and they still have testimonies. So like she just says, as if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me, type thing. But not too long after I kind of shared some things with her, and she is just such a sweet soul. And a lot of times, if we have discussions, or in the past when we've had these discussions, there will be times where I'll wake up and I kind of hear her crying, things like that. And so then it's like, well, okay, well, I'm not going to talk about this anymore. Yeah, I basically had just said I'll just be miserable and just go to church and just do whatever because I just want to keep her happy. Um, but she shortly after we kind of had one of our first talks, and I let her know that I was questioning some things. She actually got up in a fast and testimony meeting and said, she got really emotional and said, a family member, a really close family member, recently confided in me that they're struggling with their testimony. And I never thought that this person would ever struggle with their testimony. And they seem so solid and, things like that. And her intent was she had good intents. It wasn't to, I don't know what it was, but I actually remember being kind of hurt by that I felt put on display. Nobody knew it was me or whatnot, but she had friends coming up to her after sacrament meeting just saying, "Oh my gosh, did they talk to their bishop?" This kind of thing. And it's like, you know, anyway. So it
Yeah.
made me feel a little bit, a little bit awkward. And I kind of told her that, and she, that wasn't her intent, but she's just very believing, and it's important to her. And even since that time, I actually got asked to be in the bishopric, and I said yes. I was in the bishopric for about a year before we moved out of that ward, and I basically did it for her. But it was just, when I'm doing that work and putting so much time, energy towards something that I don't believe in, it just really was a struggle for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a yeah, as I listen, I can just feel the heaviness of it, and you can feel it on both sides for sure. It's like you know, I feel relatively similar about my wife and I. Like we both served missions, and we growing up, it was just like the church was our standard. It was so much of how we identified ourselves and viewed ourselves in the context of the world. And so to lose that is so challenging, and it's very it can be so painful when you still believe so strongly and feel that you're losing someone. That's it's so hard, and it's and it just kind of it compounds in a way, because if you see the pain in your partner that they're going through because they feel like they're losing you, but you in turn kind of feel like you're trying to be honest, you're trying to live good principles. It's so conflicting.
Yes, it really is. And right now, if she wasn't, you know, if it was just up to me, we wouldn't go to church at all anymore. Um, and the hard part is I've actually really put off diving deeper into so much of church history and things like that. I put it off for a long time after I read that first part about polyandry. I really kind of didn't touch anything like that for a couple years. I was in the bishopric. I was very strategic when I'd get up there and bear testimony on fast and testimony. I never said anything about Joseph Smith. I never said anything about the Book of Mormon. I would testify about families, and because there are a lot of good principles. There are a lot of amazing things that can help us grow, and part of me was like, well, just, it's like insurance. Like, even if you never use it, it's still going to make your life better. Um, but I remember having a conversation with my wife once, and I said, in an alternate universe where the church didn't exist and you and I were married, don't you think we could still raise happy, responsible, good children? And she said, well, yeah, of course. I don't feel like we need the church to raise happy children, but there's some sort of reckoning that's got to come, because my kids they're so good. My 9-year-old son he will pray for the missionaries. He will pray that we will read our scriptures, and he has such a good heart. In fact, the other night he he asked me, "Dad, what's the pearl of great price?" He just was sitting over on the couch with his quad over there that he got when he got baptized, and he just loves that thing. And at that point, I had to decide, well, how do I want to approach this? Um, and I really just kind of said what the church teaches about it, not some of the things that I've said. Well, where do I start? There's some big problems with that. Um, but what actually where my story progresses is after I was in the bishopric, when I got called to be in the bishopric, we actually had already decided we were going to move to the house that we're living in now. And I told them when they called me, we're moving in a year. We already know we're moving. And he said, that's fine. So when I said I can be in the bishopric for a year, I can do anything for a year. I'll do it. And then we moved to our new ward, and they already knew we were coming. And after a while, I got asked to be the elders quorum president, and my heart just dropped. I didn't feel like I could do it. And I ended up in the meeting with the stake president, said, okay, yeah. And then I remember being at work the next day, feeling behind and overwhelmed by just work, zero to do with church. And I just thought, I can't even keep my head above water in life. And being elders quorum president will be even busier than being in the bishopric. So I finally I decided I emailed the stake president and just said, I've decided I really just can't do this. I've got too much going on. I really just can't do this. And so
Can,
that
can I
Sure, go
ask?
ahead.
So, in the conversations with the stake president previously, had you talked about your concerns just faith wise, or was it more just a balance of life, wondering if you could take it on in your conversation?
So the conversation when I accepted it, I had no conversation with him at all about any of my concerns. When I let him know that I couldn't accept the call, I just sent him an email. It was a pretty lengthy email, but well, it wasn't that lengthy, but I just said I basically pinned it up to professional life, church balance that I just didn't have. We've got 4 young kids. I just don't have time. I'm too overwhelmed. I I basically said I spoke too hastily and accepted the call without realizing like I don't have any more of me to give at this point. And actually, I never heard back from the stake president. He never responded or said, okay, I understand, or anything like that. It was just a few weeks later, they called somebody else in church, and it was like, well, okay, all right, I guess they got it. And so I kind of avoided interacting with the stake president where possible because I'm trying to avoid any awkward conversations or whatnot. But that was the point where I said, I need to make a decision and just really learn more. And so I actually started doing some research and things online, and started watching some Mormon stories, and they have a subset on there called LDS discussions. And it was, for me, it was very good. They're very in-depth videos, and I feel like they're not people who are angry and bitter against the church. They're really just trying to say, okay, well, here are the sequence of events. Here are the facts. Here are the things that we have details for, and here are the ones that maybe we don't have details for, type thing. So that for me has been really eye-opening, has kind of really helped answer my questions without just being like, well, you got to have faith, or you know so anyway, so that's really helped answer my questions. And even then, I haven't watched all of them. But yeah, I basically have no belief in the church at all right now. So
Yeah. So I want to hear more of your perspective on making things work with your family, with your wife, with your kids, um, and how do you find the balance of trying to be honest, but also trying to be a good father and to keep peace in the home?
yes, that's the real hard part, because like we were talking about before, the church kind of gives you an outline and says, here's what it means to be a good father, and here's what it means to help your children grow and learn and gain testimonies. Um, my wife still will do come follow me. She does that quite a bit at night. She will get the kids together and talk about things. They'll read from the scriptures. They'll watch a lot of the church has a lot of like cartoon type videos for kids, and they love those, and they watch those um, all the time. If there's and my wife just kind of leaves me out of it. We still have family prayer every night. Um, we pray at every meal. We basically, from the outside looking in, and for my kids, they think that everything's normal. My third child got baptized this last uh, December, and that was a little bit of a tricky time because my tempo recommend was expiring in October. So basically 6 weeks before he was getting baptized. And I think as time has progressed, my wife and I have been able to get better and clearer and more open communication. She knows that she gets emotional, and so she knows that that makes me say, I don't like making you cry. I don't want to make you cry. Um, it is hard because in conversations that we've had, we have both made comments along the lines, and we never fight, but we both made comments about us each thinking that maybe the other would be better off without each other, if that makes sense. Maybe, she'll say something like, maybe it would be better if, you know, I left you alone, and I don't want you to be miserable your whole life. Um and there's a very real part of me that's just thought, they'd be happier if she just believes it so much that I want her to have somebody that supports her and believes what she believes. I just don't believe it. And the hard part is she has said, "Well, I don't want to feel like you think I'm stupid because I believe it." And the same from my perspective. I don't want her thinking I'm just weak-willed. I just I'm faithless, and I'm unwilling to believe. And that's really the crux of the matter, is we just don't know how to get past that, because it used to be I told a guy I know professionally who's never had any affiliation with the church. He kind of knows about some of it, and I told him, if I could just get to the point where I was just going to church and didn't really have any other callings, and didn't didn't pay tithing or things like that, I'd be fine just going to church on Sunday and just kind of going through the motions. Um, but that's essentially where I am now, and it's hard. It's hard feeling like I'm being dishonest with my children, um, because I used to just think everything that the church did and taught would be beneficial. But when you take a look outside, and when I've stepped back, I realize there's a lot of things and a lot of conditioning that we go through that just changes your perspective on life, and a lot of them I just don't feel like are healthy. I still like I don't really have any desire to drink coffee, but the thought of me drinking coffee is like, oh my gosh, like it makes me feel sick. And the thought of going and spending money on Sunday, and that's why I've heard for every 10 years you're in the church, you need a year to basically transition. We're just really, really taught that way. The other night, when my son asked about the pearl of great price, later, right before prayer, my 11-year-old daughter said something like, "Is it true that women can't be prophets?" And I don't know if I even answered. I just kind of stay quiet during those. And my wife said, "Well, yeah, women have other callings." And my 9-year-old son said, "What? That isn't fair." Growing up in the church, though, that's just always the way it was. It didn't bother me then, because that's the way I'd been conditioned. I It's not that there are things that I want to do, but I want to figure out who I am without the church. And I don't know that I'll be able to fully do that. I feel like if I were to go golfing with my children on Sunday, I feel like my relationship with them would be infinitely better than one of my children fights going to church every week. He sits and complains about sacrament meeting and asks how much longer 5 times every Sunday. He asks, when is this going to be over? I don't want to go. Can we go home? That kind of thing. And one week, my wife was not able, he was refusing to get out of bed and come to church. And I sent them along. I got him up. I got him ready for church. And I basically just had to say, there's a lot of things in life many things we have to do that we don't always understand, but we do them for other people. And this will make your mother happy if you come to church. So please just come. And, but I wanted to say, me too, bro. Let's stay home. Let's watch football, that kind of thing. One of the things I struggle with right now is I know lots of people, including family members, that are no longer active and in church. And I know a lot of them, and I look at them and I look at their lives and I say, I don't want to trade my life in the gospel for that life. I think when they kind of lost the parameters and the rudder of the gospel guiding our future decisions, they made decisions in the very opposite direction and become alcoholics or things like that. So there are many things, like alcohol, that it's like I really have no desire to drink alcohol. Um, I would like the decision to make that decision. I would like the ability to make that decision, but I do think I need to find what my new guiding principle is. And that's actually, I think when I first talked to you, that was what I had kind of reached out to you because you had mentioned something about stoicism and whatnot, and I thought, well, that sounds nice. Maybe that's something I can gravitate towards, and because naturally we just want to kind of make decisions that are bad for us, and so I want to keep my family happy and healthy, and I'm just trying to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, I have a question that I want to get to, but first I want to follow up on how did you how did you end up responding, or what did you do in that situation where you talked about with your uh, child turning 8, your temple recommend expiring?
Oh yeah.
Finish that story. What did you decide to do? How did that play out?
So I had a good conversation with my wife, and it was one of the better ones that we've had where nobody was really emotional or um, she. So I basically we were on a walk, and I said, okay, now we need to talk about something I've been putting off, um, and that's our son's baptism. And I just said, what do you want to do? And he wanted me to baptize him. And she said, would you even want to baptize him? And I said, yeah, I mean, he's important to me. I don't know that I believe that baptism is what we are taught or the importance that we put on it. From my perspective, I have just as much authority to baptize my child. From my perspective, I'm not doing him a disservice by baptizing him. Um, because she had said, "Do you even want to?" And I said, "Yeah," because it's a special moment, doing something that a big important thing that gets a lot of attention. I want to be part of that as much as possible. And I said, uh, I can. It was really hard because it's like, well, our options are I could go have a temple recommend interview. I wasn't doing anything that was against the teachings of the church that would warrant losing my temple recommend. But there are the questions of, do you have a testimony of the restoration of the gospel and of the Book of Mormon? Those questions, and I said, well, I can go and I can say yes, or I can have some sort of deeper conversation. What would you like me to do? And she said, well, I don't really want to out you, something like that. I don't want to out you. I don't want to. bring attention to where you don't want it. Um, so we didn't come to a hard conclusion on that. We basically said, okay, well, if I can baptize him, I'm going to baptize him. He wanted me to baptize and confirm him, and I didn't go get a temple recommend because I don't want to lie about it. I know a lot of the questions are black and white. Do you follow the word of wisdom? Do you wear your temple garments? Do you do those things? And I could answer to those, but I don't want to lie about it. I want to be honest. And I know for some bishops or members of the bishopric, they would say that's enough for me and that's fine. Um, what we ended up doing was the bishop never said anything to me about my temple recommend. We went, and they let me baptize and confirm him. There was no uh, follow up on my temple recommend. And so we just kind of left it at that. And for that point, it was fine. It worked out.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a very challenging predicament. And I think I may have shared before, but this almost exact same scenario happened with me. Our son was born, baby blessing, same situation with temple recommend. And I told my wife, I said, look, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna try and do this, I'm gonna set up temple recommend, I'm gonna be honest, and I'm just gonna see what happens. And you know uh so I went through that, and they still signed the recommend, even though I never answered yes to a few of those questions, and was able to go through with it, and it worked for what it was. But yeah, it is it's such a challenging scenario. And and I think that gets us to the point of uh talking more about this with the family. I guess the question that I find myself that I find going through my head as we're talking is, do you feel that it would be possible to have more of a compromise where you can be honest with your wife and your kids in family situations, with some of your questions and concerns? It doesn't mean that you have to go into detail, but you can say, look, there's things that I struggle with, but I this principle I think is so good, and it's played out in my life in this way that could allow you maybe the best of both worlds, to feel a little bit more honest and authentic, but still be a leader in your home and your family. And if yes, what are the challenges that you see in trying to go that direction?
There is, to a degree, I feel like at this point, and I shared with a friend of mine who's pretty similar. Uh, and everybody has their own viewpoint, but I feel for me, if there's any considerations or any not considerations, if there's any concessions to be made, right now I'm the one that has to make them. Um, because to my wife, going to church every week and activities during the week and things like that are important to her. And so I am trying to support her on that. I do think ultimately in the near future it'll be time to have a conversation with my children and just say basically, with anything, and in myself, I had to be ready to have those conversations with myself, even, of okay, until I was ready to actually consider anything outside of what I already knew, I wasn't ready to talk about it and read. And with my wife, when I've had conversations, I've kind of asked her, like, well, doesn't it bother you? Polyandry, doesn't that bother you? Because it bothers me. And she said, yeah, it bothers her, but it doesn't bother her enough to learn more about it. So, and it's hard because there's no gray. It's black and white. It's hard to, nobody stays semi-active for a long time. So, and I also feel like I need to potentially have a conversation with the members of the bishopric. I was asked recently to speak, and I just said, you know what, now's not a good time for me. But I may need to have a conversation and just say, you know, like you had mentioned, I don't really want to discuss it more right now, but I do want to let you know that I don't have a testimony of the gospel, and my position with church right now is I'm supporting my wife and my family, and I'm going to do my best to do that, but I'm not really interested in speaking in church, or my ministering companion is the stake patriarch, and man, he's good at ministering. He doesn't let me slip. But so I'm still trying to find the balance. I'm trying to figure out what our life is going to be going forward, and I want to support my wife, but I also want them to have their own decisions. I don't want to just be like, "Oh, well, let's look at all this negative things," because anybody who's angry and bitter, I do not want to be one of those people. I don't want to be, even some of my siblings when they talk about, I don't want to paint things in a negative light. And it's hard to not get that way, because when you get to the point of, wow, what did you feel like you've been lied to and misled, and that you've dedicated so much of your time and energy and resources to something that is not what you thought it was. um your reaction, it's a loss. It's the stages of grief. You have that loss, and it's there are times where it would be easy to be angry about it. I remember the point where I finally said, you know what, the stake president doesn't have authority over me, because you always feel that subservient level, even now. I don't know about our mission president. If he called me, I might be like, oh, sorry, uh I don't, I don't want to have a conversation about it right now. But the feeling of you know the church doesn't have this authority over me to make these decisions for me. I can actually just say no when somebody asks me to talk, was like, whoa, that's that's crazy to think about, because I was the type, and I was raised, you do what you're asked to do, you do what you're supposed to do. And it's like, well, you know what, really, I can make this decision. And that's more that I what I would want to kind of instill in my children, of like, well, what do you think? Let's think about it. Maybe my son asking what the pearl of great price is, maybe we could go and look and see, because that's another one of those things, that there are things that, as I'm getting in my deconstruction of my testimony, there are things that I'm like, you know what, the pearl of great price never really sat right. It didn't seem like it didn't make any sense. I'm like, well, wait, where is this from, and what is this from? There are things like that that you're like, oh, before it just wasn't all that important to me, and now I'm like, wow, that doesn't make any sense at all. So I want my children to understand it. I want them to be good people. That's the biggest thing. I want them to be good, kind people. I want them to, look at other people the way that Christ would look at them, even if they end up not believing in Jesus Christ. I don't know. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm just going to try to keep the peace. And um, my wife often makes comments about how I look miserable at church, and I'm like, this is just my face. I'm not miserable. This is just the way I look. But 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 she may be right. Uh, as a dentist, I make small talk with people all day, every day throughout the week. On Sunday, I don't want to make any small talk. I don't go out of my way to make small talk with people. And maybe, if I'm being honest, I should be more supportive to my wife and be more friendly, and maybe I should do that more. But I don't I don't want to entrench myself further to where it will make it harder if things progress towards me leaving the church more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm listening to you talking, there's like a lot of thoughts that are coming back to me from my own memories as well that I haven't thought about for quite a while. When a few of them, I felt relatively similar in the social realm, right? Like when you're running a business where you're kind of in the spotlight all the time, you're kind of like, I mean, you have to show up, you have to have the energy and an attitude to try and chum it up with everyone. And so, when even the first several years, I would come home from work and my wife is like, "Oh, I've been home all day. Let's go meet the neighbors. Let's go, let's invite people over." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Please, can we just not talk to anyone? Can it just be us?" So
Yes.
I resonate with that. And I think part of my challenge too in church was I felt um I felt a little bit like a fraud. Like it's
Yes.
such a challenge to be in a situation like that where I don't I don't want to make church a conflicting place for other people like it feels to me, and so I stay silent. But I don't feel like a person of integrity if I'm just kind of shutting that off. And so it's a it's such a challenge. It's a challenging situation. And so my wife and I, as we were both going through this together at some point, we are thinking, okay, how could we do this? There are good aspects of the church. Maybe we keep going, and maybe we have conversations as a family about, like, well, what do you guys actually believe? And start to kind of try and inform them on different perspectives. And there's downsides to that too. It's like, you don't want to have your family investing so much of their time and energy into something, and then making your kids feel like, this is, maybe not, that this is, that there's shaky ground that you're standing on.
Yeah.
um so it is very challenging. And I think there's no I think part of what has given me peace is that it's interesting because even like you've talked about, you see things in the church as very black and white. And I think as you transition out, you can tend to still, even though you start to like logically think of things being more as gray, we still like to think that there is one right way. And even if our way is, oh well, I'm more honest because I think through it like this, and everyone else should do it like this. And what is the right way to work through this with my family? And I a big part of what has brought me a lot of peace is just knowing there's that just doesn't really exist. That's a that's just an idea. That's just an idea that there is one right way. And so all I can try and do is focus on, what is bringing me peace today and in this moment, and what do I feel good about, move forward, make some of those decisions, see where that leads me, and then try again tomorrow.
Yeah. Yep. That's all we can do. So we'll see what the future brings. I think it's all going to work out. And I think the biggest core tenet is just being honest, not being rude or condescending. I just need to be honest and make sure that my family knows I love them and I would do anything for them, and you know, search for honesty and truth. And that's really all I can do at this point. And hopefully with that, more peace will come. That's what I'm really going for.
Yeah. Let me ask you, in over this period of time where it has maybe felt more tumultuous, what things have brought you peace? Like what are some of the times that you can think of, or what was happening when you did feel more peace in the moment? And do you strive for those, or does it seem like it just kind of comes and goes?
It varies because one thing that was kind of a struggle before was just knowing, you think about, well, what about I felt like I had spiritual experiences growing up, and maybe not a ton. Um, Thinking about, well, what were those actual spiritual experiences? And for me, I've realized that there are things that I personally get fulfillment from. And I certainly could stand to be better at them, but things like learning and growing my skills and ability. I'm trying to be more physically or health conscious. I need to do that better and more. Um, but learning, I think that's really what it is. I think that in the church and in the gospel, I think we feel good when we learn and grow and better ourselves. I think that's really what it is. The church provides an avenue for us to improve our lives. And then, I had a buddy that is a full active member of the church that I recently came out to, kind of told him about this. And he made a comment that, like, well, if it's not true, then what's basically even the point of living, and like what's the point of doing anything? And I made the comment to him that the church doesn't have a monopoly on happiness. You've got to find the things that make you happy. And spending time with my family, uh, doing, just interacting with them, golfing with my kids, practicing their musical instruments with them. I feel those same feelings, what I formerly attributed to the spirit, when I spend that quality time. And really, it's just that love that I share with my family that gives me those good feelings. And when I read certain books that make me think, oh my gosh, that's it's eye-opening, it's enlightening, it makes me look at my life certain ways and self-reflect. Those things help me grow and feel happy. And those things have nothing to do with the gospel. They just are things that I think our intellectual and our higher being craves, is learning and improving. That's what we really should strive for.
Yeah, yeah, well said. That's beautiful. I think growth is something that definitely resonates with me, and I think probably everyone. Um, I think it's interesting because I think you could can state it like you said and say, there are things that have nothing to do with the gospel, but at the same time you could, you know make a compelling argument that they are some of the core tenets of the gospel, or that I mean, one thing that's been fun for me is a lot of the different beliefs that I've learned about from people all over the world, is that there's always this big idea that comes back to loving ourselves and loving other people and serving other people, time with family. Like they're all there, just like you said. The church doesn't have a monopoly on happiness. There's a lot of things that you could replace that word with, and that is one of the things that gives me like kind of a curious excitement for there being something bigger than this life. Is, man, why are all of these kind of maybe not necessarily foreign concepts, but um things that are just kind of feelings, why are these things that resonate with all of us, and we see them in common in so many different religions? And so that's something that makes me excited, thinking, yeah, maybe there's somebody bigger up there running the show, and we all kind of have our own takes on it, and we kind of go different directions, but we have these common threads between things. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I love your thoughts. And we were talking just before uh we started recording, and I was you were kind of commenting that, well, I don't know if I have anything special to share as far as like conclusions that I've come through and anything. And my thought is just that I think sometimes there's just a big amount of peace and comfort that comes from knowing that other people are going through the same types of things, asking the same kinds of questions, struggling with how to make certain decisions and which direction to go. And sometimes by just being able to hear that and understand that, nobody has it completely figured out. We're all kind of in this together.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of peace in that. And I was also reminded of, as you were talking, I recently interviewed my parents' former stake president, and he was talking about just respecting everyone's journey, not viewing his journey as more important or correct or righteous than anyone else's, that we're all on independent journeys. We live in a world together and we're trying to find congruence together, but there's no reason why, we should look at others thinking that their journey is inferior to ours, or even thinking that ours is inferior to anyone else's. If we just view them as independent and we're all trying to figure things out, that's also something that I think can bring a lot of peace.
Sure. Absolutely.
Um,
All right.
any other last thoughts you want to share?
Um, I don't think so. It's kind of just been an information, uh, just getting all my thoughts and feelings off my chest. But it's been helpful. Thanks for letting me come on. I know I was listening to it, waiting for my daughter to finish a piano lesson, and I texted you and said, "Hey, man, I'm enjoying your podcast." And then you said, "How are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm probably stuck in the church forever, but so the same." But it's been good. And like you said, it just is helpful knowing that I'm not the only one. Sometimes I feel like I'm sitting there in church and feel like I'm the imposter there, that nobody else feels the way that I do, that nobody else maybe questions some of the way things are portrayed. But you know, we just keep doing our best, and we'll see what the next chapter of life brings.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and experiences. And who knows? Maybe at some point we do an update, and you've got some breakthroughs, or how you've made it work more congruently, or decided on some other path. And I think, again, regardless of what that is, I think you can still view it as growth and progress. So
Sure,
thanks again.
absolutely.
Appreciate your time, Blake.
Of course, Derek. We'll talk to you later.